I'm Jay Patel, a regional analyst here at Intelligence Fusion, and I'll be talking about the impacts and risks of wildfires on businesses and some ways that businesses can mitigate this risk. So wildfires are and have been increasing for a long time. Wildfires can last anywhere between a couple of hours, a couple of days, even a couple of months. The longer a wildfire lasts is more likely to put strain on kind of like emergency services, especially with resources and even controlling the fire. This can have an impact on business as well. There's uncountable amounts of wildfires each year, and some countries are more prone than others, and each country will have a way to track and kind of mitigate wildfires. However, wildfires have the capability of burning acres of land in a short space of time, which again is another challenge against businesses, but also the emergency services. There's multiple ways a wildfire can start. I think the one we're seeing the most recently over the last couple of years, and especially this year in kind of like the summer period, we've seen quite a lot of dry spells. So that can be heat waves, droughts combined, especially across woodlands, which then is allowing kind of the fire to ignite. On top of that, there's also the importance of investigating when a fire does happen. It's very clear 9 times out of 10 if there is kind of arson involved in that. But it's really important to kind of distinguish whether this is a natural wildfire or if it has kind of been set. I don't want to use the word deliberately because even though arson would kind of connote that it would have been kind of deliberate, it's not always malicious. Fires can happen at any time. So the criminal intent is not always there. But either way, the fire is still damaging. So wildfires have the potential to spread quite quickly, and they can spread with force, especially based on the kind of environmental factors around the fire. Embers from wildfires can travel up to 1 mile, which can start secondary fires. So even if a business has got the kind of procedures in place and has done everything they can to kind of contain themselves from being affected by the wildfire, wildfires can still happen even if your business is not near a forest or kind of like a wildland. So businesses tend to be directly impacted by wildfire financially. This can include loss in insurance. In some cases, premiums are millions, so that can take a toll on the business, and sometimes it can mean the business going bankrupt. Also, you've got the kind of repairs. So buildings are likely, especially if you're in the kind of hotspot of the wildfire, buildings are likely to be either partially damaged or destroyed. What you might find is if a substantial amount of machinery or stock is destroyed in the wildfire, it can lead to outsourcing. Normally, outsourcing is more expensive than locally producing. So this has a knock-on effect on the future of the business and the supply chain of the business. As I just kind of briefly mentioned, there's the destruction of the buildings. Even kind of making those repairs, again, is costly, it's timely, it's not something that can be done immediately. So depending, again, on your location, on your business, the severity of how the direct impact is very dependent on the wildfire, depending on the situation. But either way, you are very likely to see that a business will be impacted financially from a wildfire. Intelligence Fusion is now part of the Sigma 7 portfolio, providing unrivaled risk services to businesses globally. With the increasing unpredictability and intensity of wildfires, our colleagues at Paragon Risk Engineering have designed a brand new service to support organisations across the United States to address the direct and indirect impacts of wildfire on their operations. To find out more about their comprehensive wildfire mitigation consultancy and how their expertise can help you build a more resilient business against wildland fire, download a solution overview using the link in the video description. Another direct impact of a wildfire on a business is employment. It can be transportation. Depending on the location of the wildfire, roads can easily become impacted, especially when the emergency services are trying to deal with the fire. And sometimes areas are kind of evacuated and contained off. So that would massively impact people getting to work, which again would impact on your business. You also have the risk of injury. So depending again on the location of the wildfire, you could We're dealing with kind of fatalities or injuries of your staff force. So there's numerous ways that a wildfire can indirectly impact on a business. I think the main one is supply chain. This is very dependent, again, on the size of the wildfire, the duration the wildfire lasts. But you will always see a knock-on effect on not being able to either meet quotas or kind of be able to produce the same amount, especially when a wildfire is happening. So you will see either a dip or kind of like a lull in supply chain. Again, the severity of that is completely dependent, but supply chain tends to be heavily impacted. And that can not only be local, so that can spread across communities and even cities. So critical infrastructure can be impacted in a wildfire, which has a knock-on effect on businesses in the area. It can leave businesses without utilities, even like such as power or electricity. And that tends to be either the critical infrastructure is being damaged by the fire or it's being isolated by the emergency services, utilities like gas, anything that could potentially be another ignition point and spread the wildfire, which again leaves the business without access. And this can last for an undisclosed amount of time. One thing that probably is worth considering is, depending on the severity and the size of the wildfire, we've seen this in Australia plenty of times, the emergency services put all the resources kind of into controlling the fire, especially the longer a wildfire lasts. This can make a business vulnerable to criminal activity such as cyber attacks, thefts, the vulnerability of looting, especially in areas that have been evacuated or damaged. Another indirect impact of wildfires is poor air quality. That can happen as the wildfire is happening, and it can even last when the wildfire is being controlled and extinguished. Poor air quality can come in the form of kind of ash clouds or just really poor visibility. So that can really impact on roads and kind of distribution, which has an indirect impact on supply chain. I think it's worth noting as well that the aftermath of a wildfire can be just as severe as the wildfire itself. There's no quick solution, there's no easy solution, and most solutions are costly, and wildfires can start just as quick as they're extinguished, which means even if you've controlled a section of the fire or even extinguished a full fire, there is still that risk that it can reignite and affect the same kind of community and businesses already that have already been impacted previously. Although wildfires can start with little warning, wildfires are foreseeable and actionable, which means that they can be mitigated. We're seeing an increase in wildfires outside of the typical wildfire season, and it's likely that we will see a greater increase as the global temperature increases. Wildfire hotspots are becoming more active than usual, and we're seeing wildfires occur in places that are prone to wildfires or that haven't really experienced wildfires previously. This means that more businesses are likely to be impacted. There are different ways that businesses can mitigate against the risk of wildfire or being impacted by the wildfire. A few examples would include dynamic risk assessing. This could be a site check, looking at kind of how you store or where you store flammable items, reducing the use of flammable items in kind of hotspot areas or areas that are more likely to have a wildfire. Another good resource is wildfire training. This could be kind of going through the evacuation procedure, making sure people are aware of the risk, know how to act if a wildfire was occurring. Businesses can make use of the resources that are out there. There's kind of tracker maps, or this could be consulting a professional that can help identify if and how their business is at risk. They'll be able to advise on actionable measures that can help protect the business assets and also the people. And with this information, it's also advised to consider contingency planning, which will help highlight the specific impacts that your business may face, and again, how you could then put procedures in place to mitigate this risk.